if these H200s are going to land in China, as I think Jensen has noted earlier on a number of occasions, there's huge demand from companies like Alibaba and ByteDance and Tencent and Baidu. And so these are very capable GPUs. They could be used for training. They could also be used for inference. And so they would make a big difference for those companies in terms of the next 6 to 9 months of training advanced models. Now, the Chinese government, though, is, of course, walking a very fine line here and a tightrope, trying to make sure that domestic demand, that is domestic GPU makers like Huawei and like some of the smaller companies that have recently gone public in Hong Kong and Shanghai, like BREN and More Threads, it wants to make sure those companies also have demand in China from some of the leading Chinese companies. So it's urging those companies to look at using those domestic alternatives. But again, the thing that Jensen has highlighted is that most of the developers in China, which is half the world's AI developers, have used Nvidia hardware and software like CUDA to develop these models. So they're very used to using Nvidia products. So that's why they would welcome those H200s. But the sort of geopolitical winds, if you will, around these transactions remain complicated. And it may be that it will take a meeting of the two presidents in Beijing at the end of March and early April to get things moving on this, because it's a very complicated issue with constituencies on both sides opposing the sale of H200 to China.
So we are waiting on President Trump's visit that is slated for March the 31st. But having said that, we're seeing reports here that DeepSeek reportedly not showing U.S. chip makers its upcoming AI model. And then there's a separate report that DeepSeek 2.0, which is set to be released as soon as next week, as some say, was trained on the Blackwell. What do you make of all of these kinds of headlines coming through?
Yeah, great question. So over the last 2 weeks, there have been a number of allegations. One is this unnamed U.S. government official who claimed that the Blackwells were trained, or that the DeepSeek's new model was trained on Blackwells in Inner Mongolia. So one wonders how the official knew where these GPUs were. I've seen no evidence that supports this, independent evidence. So that's an interesting problem. And then the other issue this week is that Anthropic and OpenAI have accused DeepSeek and some other Chinese model developers of using so-called distillation, where they can take outputs from leading models to train their models. And this is a fairly common practice in the industry, but it appears that at least some of the Chinese model developers are using this technique. So all of this comes sort of as in the lead up to the much awaited release of this latest DeepSeek model, probably something like V4 or their R2 reasoning model, as you say, maybe is ahead of next week. So I think there's a lot of rumors and sort of basically some efforts to sort of impugn DeepSeek's efforts here because it's such a consequential company. And as we remember last year when they released their first reasoning model, we had a major reaction on Wall Street that saw a major sell-off. Now people have since people have overcome the sort of initial fear of DeepSeek and that Chinese models are better or cheaper to use, because it's a much more complicated issue than just Chinese models are either better or cheaper. But I think there's a lot of anticipation for this release of DeepSeek. And so I think that's why we're seeing these accusations coming from some places in industry and from U.S. government officials. But I'm looking at this very closely. I have still seen no evidence of this, and I'm looking at this pretty closely, and we'll be doing some reporting on this later.